Tapophobia is what is known as the fear of being buried alive. It is in fact said to be one of the most common phobias out there. My name is Anna, and welcome to another fine episode of the Odditorium, home to all things strange, weird, wacky, taboo, and terrifying. Today, for this installment, we'll be looking at 8 cases of premature burial. Let me warn you listeners, however, some of these stories are not for the faint of heart. Some will include horrifying details that may be difficult to hear. Therefore, listener discretion is seriously advised. With that said, here are 8 true and horrifying cases of premature burial in random order. Case number 1. And as recently as of May of 2020 in China, a 79-year-old woman who was partially paralyzed and bedridden was allegedly buried alive by none other than her own son, a 58-year-old identified only by his last name, which is ironically Ma. Authorities began to look into the situation when one day, Ma's wife called the police and reported that Ma had taken his Ma, who we'll actually call by her name Wang from here on, away in a wheelbarrow, and that he had returned home without her. Upon questioning, Ma admitted that he had buried his own mother alive out in the woods. Later that day, when police went in search of Wang's grave, they stated that they could hear her voice faintly calling out for help from under the ground. Her body was exhumed, and she turned out to be indeed alive. This was after 3 entire days spent under the ground, which makes her survival actually rather miraculous, especially when you consider that Ma had buried the elderly lady 2 meters deep, which is the approximate equivalent of 6 feet. Wang was sent to recover at a nearby hospital where she was last reported to be in stable condition. Ma was taken into custody and charged with attempted murder. Chillingly, upon finding out that his mother was still alive, reports say that evidently sadistic Ma had more or less no reaction. As far as any possible motive goes, Ma was apparently angry with his mother for having to take care of her for so long, and he decided to put an end to it. Well, it ended all right. Maybe not the way he'd wanted it, but his days of taking care of his beloved Wang, I'm guessing, are probably long over now. Case number 2. The story of Marjorie McCall occurred in Northern Ireland, where one day she fell ill, was pronounced dead, and buried. That same night of her burial, a group of grave robbers dug up her body with the hope of stealing her ring. When they went to cut her finger off, however, this awakened the not really dead Marjorie. The frightened robbers allegedly ran off. It is said that Marjorie then climbed out of her coffin and then proceeded to walk home. Ironically, at that very time, at her home, her family was gathered precisely to mourn Marjorie's death. When Marjorie knocked on the door, her husband purportedly uttered, "If I hadn't buried your mother, I would swear that was her knock." And when he opened the door to find Marjorie herself standing there, all dressed in her burial clothes, it's perhaps no shocker that he immediately fainted. Her famous gravestone in Ireland now comically reads, "Lived once, buried twice." Case number 3. This next story, now I know that I issued a listener discretion advised warning at the start of this whole thing, but this next story deserves an additional warning. It is not for the faint of heart at all, especially if you have small children. I myself am going to be struggling through this. It is very sad. You have been warned. So, this is the sick and depraved tale of victim Jessica Lunsford, who at the age of 9, it could be said, came into contact with the boogeyman himself. In Florida, during March of 2005, a gross, nasty sex offender named John Evander Cooey kidnapped and raped the little girl. He then bound her in speaker wire and proceeded to bury her alive inside a trash bag. Jessica's makeshift burial site was hidden beneath some leaves, so tragically no one discovered it until it was too late and until the little girl had already passed. It was ruled that Jessica's cause of death was asphyxiation. It was also found that she had poked 2 finger holes in the trash bag, possibly to try to get out, or else to just get more oxygen. Either way, when they discovered the bag, her small fingers were sticking out of the holes. She also been buried with her favorite stuffed animal, a purple dolphin, which the nasty-ass rapist had let her bring along when he abducted her. Not that it brings back the innocent little girl's life. Cooey the rapist was subsequently caught, apprehended, charged, prosecuted, and then sentenced to death. He never got to see that day, however, because sources say that he died of cancer while in prison. Prior to that, It is reported that Cooey was quoted as saying, quote, "I'll apologize to Jessica in heaven," end quote, to which his own father responded, quote, "I have bad news. I don't think you're going to make it there," end quote. I think I concur with the father, especially since I don't think the sick fuck got nearly enough punishment, if you ask me. One of the most famous buried alive tales is that of Angelo Hayes. In 1937, Frenchman Angelo Hayes suffered a horrific accident when, at the ripe age of 19, he badly wrecked his motorcycle, and the impact caused him to be thrown headfirst and hard into a brick wall. Doctors declared Hayes dead after they could locate no pulse, and 3 days later, Hayes would be buried. Possibly important to note here is that Hayes's face was so disfigured from the accident that his own parents were not allowed to view the body. He was subsequently buried as planned, but it was due to an investigation prompted by an insurance company that required Hayes's body be exhumed 2 days after the funeral. To everyone's surprise, they found Hayes's body was still warm. As it turned out, his body had in fact been in a deep coma, and it was his body's diminished need for oxygen that had in fact kept him alive for so long. In the aftermath of this miraculous occurrence, it is said that Hayes became a sort of local French celebrity, and people would travel from afar only to come speak to him. What's more is that in the 70s, probably as a result of fearing the possibility of being buried alive again, Angelo went on tour with a super pimped out security coffin that he himself had designed. The coffin included, but was not limited to, fancy thick upholstery, a toilet, food locker, and also a library. Case number 5. In 1915, a South Carolina woman named Essie Dunbar, at the mere age of 30, apparently died from a seemingly fatal epileptic heart attack. With medical experts confirming the death, Essie was scheduled to soon be buried. Upon hearing the tragic news, Essie's sister insisted on coming to the funeral despite living out of town. The church delayed the scheduled services in order to accommodate the attendance of Essie's sister, but the sister still had difficulties getting there and was still late to arrive. The decision was made to go ahead with the burial. It was right when the gravediggers finished burying the coffin that Essie's sister showed up. I don't know if this was common practice back then or if it is even today, but upon the sister's insistence that she be allowed to see Essie one last time, they obediently dug her body back up. When the coffin was opened, however, everyone in attendance was in for the shock of their lives. As the story goes, Essie not only sat up at that moment, but it is reported that she also smiled upon seeing her sister. Everyone in attendance was stricken with horror, and they ran away believing that she was a ghost. Essie Dunbar would go on to live another 47 years following the ordeal, although many continued to believe that she was some sort of a zombie. Her body was finally laid to rest for real in 1962, following what appears to have been a full and rich life. Case number 6. Next we have the story of one woman known only as Mrs. Boger, who was the wife of a farmer named Charles Boger. In 1893, the couple were living in Whitehaven, Pennsylvania. Mrs. Boger appeared to die suddenly of unknown causes. Doctors confirmed this. Mrs. Boger was promptly buried. A short while after, a friend of Mrs. Boger's informed husband Charles that his late wife had previously suffered from hysteria before he had met her. Apparently, her bouts of hysteria would render her in a state resembling death, and this meant, ultimately, that it was possible Mrs. Boger had not been dead after all. The thought of this possibility freaked the husband out, and after having her body quickly exhumed, his worst fears were confirmed. Mrs. Boger's body was found turned over, and her shroud and robes were torn to pieces. The glass from her coffin lid had been broken all over her body, and her skin was scratched and bloody. As if that weren't bad enough of a scene, Mrs. Boger's fingers were also entirely missing. It is commonly presumed that she had gnawed them off herself in horror of the discovery of being buried alive and in rabid attempt to escape her grave. In 1987, Stephen Small was the 39-year-old heir to a large fortune, thanks to a media company that his family had founded. Catching wind of this family's remarkable wealth, apparently, a sadistic couple by the names of Danny Edwards and Nancy Risch decided to kidnap Stephen in hopes of obtaining ransom money from his super-rich family. The couple got the idea of burying Stephen alive while they waited to collect their ransom money, and so they did. The grave was only about 3 feet deep, and Stephen was provided with a little amount of water, food, as well as a breathing tube that ran from his makeshift coffin to the open air above the ground. Unfortunately for everyone involved, before any ransom could be paid, and before Stephen could be set free, his little homemade breathing tube became clogged. Stephen subsequently suffocated to death. The two culprits, Danny Edwards and Nancy Risch, were later on caught and at the time of this recording are still serving time for the murder of Stephen Small. In this last one, we have another tragic tale which may not be for the faint of heart. Honestly, it's pretty bad, you guys, so just another added warning about that. But if you think you want to stick around, here's the story. In March of 2020, in Brazil, a 10-year-old girl named Gabrielle McCall Hayes approached her mother and confessed to her that she had been being molested by the mother's boyfriend. Instead of offering her young daughter the reassurance she'd probably been hoping for, the mother, whose name I'm not even going to bother to pronounce since she's not worth it, the mother told Gabrielle and her 13-year-old brother to get into the car, that they were going for a ride. She drove out to some remote woods. The brother would later recall thinking the mother had brought his sister there so she could beat her up. The sociopathic asshole mother, it turns out, drug her own 10-year-old daughter out into the woods where she proceeded to bury her alive. She would enlist the help of her young son, the son later testifying her threats that he best comply with her orders lest he suffer the same fate of his sister. Together, they walked until the mother spotted a hole in the ground. She then shoved the daughter down and began strangling her with electrical wire. This didn't kill the girl. Nonetheless, the mother shoved the daughter into the hole in which she buried her upside down. Gabrielle's brother would later explain to the officials that he knew Gabrielle was still alive due to the fact he could hear her from within the hole crying out for help. Reportedly, her feet could be seen sticking out of the makeshift grave where she was left to die while desperately begging for her life. The mother and son drove away from the scene, after which the mother dropped her son off at the town square and then hit up the bar for a drink. Not sure whether her daughter was still alive or not, the mother would return to the crime scene twice more after that. The first time she was allegedly still alive, but the second time she was not. That same evening, the mother walked into the police station where she filed a missing persons report, but it was just a few hours later, around midnight, that the mother would end up calling the police again and confessing to the murder. The mother was, of course, taken into custody. It is said that she appeared to show no remorse for her daughter, but that she was concerned for her husband instead. Clearly, authorities concluded the mother committed the crime out of fear that her husband might be arrested following the young daughter's allegations against him, which he would later deny, by the way, but which the brother would confirm, citing the sexual abuse was frequent. Mom was sent to a women's penitentiary, and her boyfriend was also sent to prison. As for the 13-year-old son, he spent a brief time at a juvenile detention center before being sent to live with his biological father. Well, there you have it, guys and gals. 8 unsettling true cases of premature burial. If you enjoyed this installment of the Odditorium, please do stay tuned for next week's episode, which promises to bring you even more stories of the terrifying, twisted, or just downright taboo. For now, I'm your host, Anna, signing off. Here's wishing all of you out there a fantastic day, and as always, pleasant dreams.